Hi, I'm Don, and I'm an old school kind of guy. Today I want to talk to you about well water versus city water, water testing, stuff like that. I never actually intended to make this video, but I was talking to a guy on YouTube, and he had a guy that he did a video, and the guy asked him some questions, and he didn't have the direct answer, and he knew I had talked about having well water. And so they both asked me to do a video. I said, sure, why not? It's not exactly old school, but hey, what can I say? Old school is more an attitude anyway than it is anything else. I think one reason why it makes sense for me to do this video is because, you know, back in the old days, there wasn't nearly the research that's gone on today. So we had to learn a lot of stuff for ourselves. And so we learned to understand, and I did research. So even though I left the hobby in '87, didn't come back till 2015, I still know a little bit about water. And so I'm going to do this in the 1960s, well, 70s. In the 1970s, I had a well that was very hard, iron-rich Wisconsin water. That was a challenge. In the 1980s, I was on a very, very low pH, almost pure rainwater well in Oregon. That was really nice because I like South American fish. And today I'm in Wyoming, and I have a very hard water, not a lot of iron, but a lot of hard minerals, and it runs a pH of 8.4 to 8.8, depending on how much rain we've gotten, and we don't get much. So it's usually around 8.8. Yeah, in Oregon the water came out at about 6.4 pH, sometimes less. And back in Wisconsin, it was running in the 8s. So it's too bad I don't like African cichlids. That'd be easy to take care of. I could do 100% water change every day and they'd be happy. Now, if you use reverse osmosis, you probably don't care about anything I've got to say today. And so you can just skip to the end and say goodbye. For the rest of you, I've got a couple samples here of questions that might sound a little weird, but I'm going to ask you to think about it. Do you smell your tanks? I mean, every day. I smell every one of my tanks every day. And I don't mean sniff, 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 sniff down the row. I mean, I take time to sniff a tank and then inspect it and then go on to the next one. That can help you determine early, maybe not the first day, I don't know about your sniffer, but mine isn't that sharp, but you can tell when you've got some bad stuff happening. Second question, now here we'll get even weirder. Do you ever taste your aquarium water? I know people think that's kind of weird. But hey, listen, if you're afraid to taste your aquarium water, why would your fish want to live in it? You know what I'm saying? Man, I think the water in my fish tanks is probably pure and cleaner than the water that comes out of my tap. Now, I believe in heavy filtration, and that certainly helps. But clean water, to me, that's very important for my fish. So let's talk about well water versus city water for a little bit. There are advantages to well water. There are disadvantages to well water. There are advantages to city water. There are disadvantages to city water. Sometimes you have to treat well water different than city water. Sometimes you have to treat them the same way. But do you understand why and when? That's the question. So I know I'm going to be talking about well water, but for the most part, that's going to be more towards the end. I'm going to just talk about water in general most hobbyists think everyone's on city water. All right? They know that there are a few on well water, but they don't think about it when they make a video and so forth. So I'm going to differentiate them just a little bit. The most important thing about your water, whether it's city water or well water, is test your water. Test your water. If you do not do weekly water changes, you better be testing your water every 3 or 4 days. If you do weekly water changes and you've gotten to know your water after several weeks, you can go to testing once a week. Test before every water change. Test your tap water, we'll get to why, and then test each and every individual tank, because they're all different. Unless you've got 17 tanks on one combined constant continuous flow and one filter, then they're all going to be different. So city water needs to be tested, and a lot of people don't realize this. City water needs to be tested, and much of what I'm going to say about city water goes to well water too. But did you know that city water can fluctuate in terms of pH as well in terms of other contaminants, if you will, mineral content and so forth and so on? City water by law must be tested. I don't know what the law says. Daily, twice a day, 5 times, I don't know what it says. But the test results must be made available to the public. Now, I've never seen a city that offers you daily test results, but I do know many cities put on the internet their monthly test results of their water. Microbreweries want that. So do aquarists, and there are some people with certain health issues that are concerned about those types of things. The problem is, and I've already mentioned it, water fluctuates. Plus, do you really trust your government to provide you with consistent quality water? Think about it. Who does our government hire? Usually it's somebody who's willing to work for less money than anybody else. That means they're usually someone who's rather lazy, especially on a boring job like testing water. Now, if you got an engineer, that's great. The government doesn't always hire idiots. But if you just have somebody testing water, come on, people, that's not a high IQ job. So you probably got somebody that's a little bit lazy and very unambitious, and I'm not going to trust them. I don't know about you, but that's me. And for the same reason that city water has to be tested, because things can change, so does well water have to be tested. I can't emphasize that enough. You can have your water tested by professionals. I know there's an outfit not too far away from me down in Colorado that's about $50 a pop to test your water. Now, they give you a complete write-up. I mean, they got everything. And I'd say use somebody like that once a year, maybe twice a year. I don't know, it's up to you. If you do that, then have them test, like give them a test from January, and give them a test the next year in March, and then maybe in August, and every year rotate it around, or do it twice a year, but test at different times to see what seasonal differences you get. As I already indicated, rain can change the pH. Listen, people, it can also wash contaminants down into your water. Now, with city water, it's probably more stable than well water, especially in terms of something such as that. But if you think about it, your water can change. For instance, most people don't even know this, but The concept of pH, I'm going to digress a little. This is a rabbit trail, but pH, it was created by a Danish scientist, and there's debates going on whether the P is from the French word for power, which does start with P, or if it's from the German word that stands for power, which also starts with P. But anyway you slice it, according to the institute where this Danish scientist worked, the pH stands for power of hydrogen ions. And you can go do your own study. Up until 1924, the pH was spelled capital P, small h. In 1924, that same institute changed it to small p, capital H, to emphasize the hydrogen. So now, why is that important? Because we all know about chlorine and how easy it is to get rid of. If you don't, you can study it. It's real easy to find out. But we also know about chloramine, or do we? What causes chloramine? Well, what causes chloramine is when cities add ammonia to their chlorinated water, and the ammonia particles mix with the chlorine particles, and it forms chloramine. Now, why is that significant? Well, first off, the cities like it because it helps keep the chlorine from dissipating. As I suggested before, it's easy to find out, but chlorine actually, if it's agitated like with air stones or running through pipes, the chlorine can disappear in 24 hours. So chloramine doesn't disappear so fast, and that's why we use water treatment. And if you have chlorine or chloramine, you better be using water treatment on your water changes. Now also, if you have chlorine in your water and you don't use any way of getting rid of it, and you add it to a tank where you have ammonia, you're actually creating chloramine, and you can kill your fish in a hurry. Okay, enough of the rabbit trail. So cities add ammonia to their water. Not a lot, but enough. And what it does is it forms chloramines. Now, it also will result in some extra ammonia getting into your fish tank, because not all the ammonia mixes. So that's one reason why you need to be checking your water. Also, most, I don't know, maybe all, not my field, but cities stop putting ammonia in for a month out of the year. I'm not sure exactly why, but they must have their reasons. During that month, your water is going to change. It's usually done in the spring. Okay? So be aware, and you got to test your water. Now, like I said, rain can change your pH, because rainwater is usually somewhat acidic, especially if you're near a big city where it's got a lot of acid rain. But now, just seriously, 7.0 we know is neutral. Above that is alkaline. Below that is acidic. Typically, rainwater falls and it's acidic. You know, fish can tolerate a pretty good drop, because in the wild, when it rains, their water changes pH. Well, mostly. Depends on which fish and where they are. As to how much it changes, probably not significant. But if you like African cichlids and your tap water is 6.4 and you're keeping your tank at 8.8, then you got trouble if you just do it straight up. You got to treat the water beforehand. But what happens if something happened in your tank and you don't realize instead of 8.8 it's now 8.2? And you start adding in 8.8. Now, healthy fish, probably no big deal. But who knows? And what about young fish? And so on and so forth. So, pH can change, so can the amount of contaminants. I mentioned that a couple of times. Water can also change because of, just because so many reasons. I mean, if you're near industrial area, there's apt to be pollution right on the surface of the ground. Rain comes in and washes it right down into the city water. And sure, they purify, but I don't know of any city that's running reverse osmosis, so the water's not going to come out totally pure, which means sometimes it's worse than other times. You ought to be testing every time. Okay, so what about well water? Well water, typically it's somewhat rural. I'm on the edge of the city. A lot of people probably think we're in the city. We're, 2 miles out of the city limits. But wells typically come from smaller bodies of water underground. Now, if you know that you're tapping into a massive underground lake, you've got more stability. City water has usually a massive supply of water. It's more stable. Still can be effective. But if you're on a small private well and it's got a small body of water that you're tapping into, it's not going to be as stable. So you need to test more. Private wells are more likely to be contaminated without your knowledge. Why? Because the EPA isn't monitoring. You don't have a city inspector monitoring. You don't have an engineer monitoring. It's up to you to monitor your water. And people, this is not only for your fish, this is for you. I think it just makes sense. I'm glad I'm monitoring my water for my fish, because then I know what it's doing to my family. Private wells. Private wells are more apt to be affected by rain than city, not only because of the size, but if you are in an agricultural area, that means somebody near you is using fertilizer. Okay, that's the American way. And fertilizer is what? Nitrates. Now those nitrates are being put on the corn, oats, wheat, whatever, and it washes off and runs off into the groundwater. Guess what you got in your well? Nitrates. And guess what? They only use fertilizer once a year, maybe twice. I don't know. But what I do know is your nitrates are going to spike, especially after a rainstorm that comes just after they've used the fertilizer. You better be testing. You hear where I'm coming from? Now here's another one. Because where I'm at, we don't have anybody that's farming. This prairie ground doesn't grow nothing but prairie grass, and it barely does that. But you know what? If you're near a huge cattle ranch or a cattle processing plant where they got a lot of cattle or a lot of other animals, you know what animals do? They urinate. And what is that? Ammonia. Just like your fish create ammonia, so do other critters. If you're near a lot of cattle or a lot of critters of some kind, you can have runoff that's adding ammonia to your water. Test your water. The earth filters a lot of this out, people. Not all. Now, I don't have to worry about that because, like I said, all we grow is prairie grass, and that prairie grass doesn't support much wildlife either. I'm told that it's somewhere around 200 to 300 acres per head of cattle to grow cattle and to raise cattle in Wyoming. Now, that depends on how much water you have. The more water you have, the thicker your grass is, the more cattle you can raise. But hundreds of acres per cow. We don't have a lot of cows, especially not this close to the city. So those are different ways you need to test. Now another thing, more common in the east than out here, but it happens here too. You have to test because there might be industrial waste. And you say, well, there's no industry near us. Yep, I can relate to that. Cheyenne, Wyoming does not have a lot of industry. However, somewhere like 50 years ago, the U.S. military decided to dump a bunch of toxic chemicals into a cement-lined silo underground. Guess what's leaking out in the last 10 years or so? Yeah, not in my side of town. But it's happening, and there are people living through that right now. And how do you know that some company didn't choose an unused plot of land where nobody would see them, and they started dumping stuff, and it took 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years before it started getting into your water? Test your water, people. Test it. Okay, so did you get the idea? I'm big on testing water. Yeah. Let's see. One last thought. I know this is only for the geeks, okay, which is probably 90% of the hobbyists, okay. Whether you like it or not, it tends to be true. At least the serious hobbyists. Man, you got to be organized to take care of multiple tanks, to breed all these fish and so forth. So here's what I recommend. You know that professional outfit that I suggested you get a water report from once a year? Keep a chart of everything they tell you and compare them year to year to year. And I say keep a chart, not what they give you. Create a spreadsheet or a Word document with columns in it so you can see real quickly what the differences are. Helps you understand your water. And I recommend you test your water every week before your water change, or before every water change. And if you don't do a water change weekly, I suggest you test more often. You got a new tank, test it every other day or every day. And track down every single testing on a spreadsheet, a Word document, something with columns so you can compare for every tank. Every tank gets its own little sheet of paper or computer document or whatever. I like to use spreadsheets because I can have multiple pages. I have every tank in one spreadsheet. If you don't understand, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. I test at a minimum for pH, ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. I also have a TDS meter I use, and I can get more detail if I want. And I'm not a very trusting soul. So I do use the liquid test, but you know what? I also have 2 different kinds of test strips. I use those once in a while just to see if the liquid controls are doing it right. Read the directions on the liquid controls carefully, because a couple of bottles you have to shake really hard and vigorously, or you will not get consistent results. Accurate results, more important. All right, that's about it. Got any questions? Ask away. Got any complaints and you think I'm totally washed up on something? You're probably right, because I am not the world's greatest expert on this. I know what I know, I share what I know. That's all I got. But I tell you what, you can have fun. Bye.